Evening, everybody. Go ahead and open your Bibles to 1 Samuel 17. If you need questions, they're in the tray in the back. We're on lesson 303 tonight. Let's go ahead and have a word of prayer before we get into the reading and answer some of the questions. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for another day that you have provided to us. We thank you for the opportunities that we have each and every day, and the jobs that we have, and the families that you have blessed us with, the relationships we share. We thank you for all these opportunities that you give to us on a daily basis to be able to love, to be loved, to serve, to be served. We are blessed in so many ways, Father, and we recognize the great blessing we have this evening to study your word together with brothers and sisters who are seeking the same goal, who are striving for the same pursuits, which is to know you, to be closer to you, and ultimately, Father, to be with you forevermore when this life is over. Please bless us in this pursuit, Father. Please watch over us this evening as we study your word, and be with all the classes, Father, as we here at Brownsburg strive to grow in love for one another, and most importantly for you. So in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. 1 Samuel chapter 17. There's a lot in here, so let's go ahead and get started and get to reading. All right, 1 Samuel chapter 17. So now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Sukkah, which belongs to Judah, and it is encamped between Sukkah and Azekah in Ephes Damim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in line of battle against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on the mountain of one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And there came out from a camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs, and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spearhead weighed 600 shekels of iron. And his shield bearer went before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistine said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of I've tried pronouncing this multiple times. Ephrathite, I'm going to go with that. In Bethlehem in Judah, named Jesse, who had 8 sons. In the days of Saul, the man was already old and advanced in years. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had followed Saul to the battle, and the names of his sons who went to the battle were Eliab the firstborn, and next to him Abinadab, and third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 eldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came forward and took his stand morning and evening. And Jesse said to David his son, "Take for your brothers an ephah of this parched grain and these 10 loaves, and carry them quickly to the camp to your brothers. Also take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their 1,000. See if your brothers are well, and bring some token from them." Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. And David rose early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper, and took the provisions and went, as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the encampment as the host was going out to the battle line. shouting the war cry. And Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. And David left the things in the charge of the keeper of the baggage and ran to the ranks and went and greeted his brothers. As he talked with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before, and David heard him. All the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were much afraid. And the men of Israel said, "Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come to defy Israel. And the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and will give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel." And David said to the men who stood by him, "What shall be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" And the people answered him in the same way, "So it shall be done to the man who kills him." Now Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, "Why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle." And David said, "What have I done now? Was it not but a word?" And he turned away from him toward another and spoke in the same way, and the people answered him again as before. When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fall because of him. Your servant will go and fight with the Philistine." And Saul said to David, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine to fight him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep the sheep for his father. And when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God." And David said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Then Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a helmet of bronze on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. And David strapped his sword over his armor, and he tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. Then David said to Saul, "I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them." So David put them off. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. The Philistine moved forward and came near David with his shield bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field." Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give the dead bodies of the hosts of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." When the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone and slung it, and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. There was no sword in the hand of David. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of its sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and Judah rose with a shout and pursued the Philistines as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron, so that the wounded Philistines fell on the way from Shaaraim as far as Gath and Ekron. And the people of Israel came back from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their camp. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he's put his armor in his tent. As soon as Saul saw David go out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, as your soul lives, O king, I do not know. And the king said, inquire whose son the boy is. And as soon as David returned from striking down of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, whose son are you, young man? And David answered, I am the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite. All right. It's a long chapter, but I think it's a pretty good one. All right, so chapter 17, we're picking up after we've kind of been introduced to David in chapter 16 a lot of the introduction is focused on a little bit of his character, but also he's already been anointed by Samuel. He's going to become king. He's going to have the kingdom taken from Saul and given to David. God's already said this is going to happen, and we know from previous chapters, from God's interactions with Samuel and Samuel's interactions with Saul, that this new king is going to be a man after God's own heart. All right, so we're going to see, hopefully, those kinds of characteristics start to show up with David as we're introduced to him more and more. So chapter 17, we kind of take a jump from chapter 16, and it's questionable when chapter 16, the end of chapter 16 verses here in chapter 17 take place. Did David play some for Saul before chapter 17? I don't want to spend a whole lot of time about that, but maybe those are a little bit jumbled around here. But this is still while David is fairly young and he has not yet been fully acquainted with, a lot of the struggle and a lot of the experience he's going to have going forward. So really in a lot of ways, this is a first kind of journey we'd get to go on with David here. So chapter 17 starts with the armies of the Philistines and the armies of Israel going up in battle against one another in the valley of Elah. What makes this battle unique, though? What's different in the stage that is set here? Because it's not just the two armies going up to meet one another. What's unique about this one? Goliath comes out here, and what do we know about Goliath? What descriptions are given about him? Yeah, he's a giant. He's 6 cubits in a span. I guess, right, the 6 cubits is from your elbow to the tip of your index finger, right? So it could vary, but I heard some differences between just under 8 feet to over 10 feet, right? I guess large might be a simple way of putting it. Large man. And then we get some descriptions about what he's got with him. Does anybody happen to know, maybe in more terms that we would use today, like what some of his tools were at his disposal that he had on him that are given descriptions here? Anybody happen to know?
In my Bible, it says the weight of his armor was about 125 pounds.
Okay, so that bronze breastplate that he's got on him is going to be about 125 pounds. It's a lot, right? I don't know if anybody's had to carry 125 pounds just around in a backpack before, but that's a lot. And he's using that as his armor. What else does it tell us about him?
One of my commentaries said something about the spear was about 18 pounds.
Yeah, like the head of the spear being, I can't remember the description it uses in chapter 17, but I also saw 15-ish pounds for the head of the spear, which I was trying to think of that. Anything like just having a stick, and then, even if you just have 5 pounds at the end of a stick, right? The amount of weight, you still would have to be prepared for. But he's got 15 pounds just at the end of this long spear, right? Which I'm guessing, based on his size, probably is also quite long. So he's just able to carry 15 pounds out as if it's like, like he's carrying a spoon or a chopstick, right? Like that's pretty tough, let alone throwing it or, actually using it in war. All right? Big guy, and all of the details that we are given about him are meant to be somewhat terrifying, right? To imagine someone that carries around that much weight and is still functional, right? He's still alive, so obviously he's functional in that kind of armor. And Saul tells David later on, he's a man of war, not just recently, but from his childhood, he was a man of war. Like, he's been bred to do this. He has been raised up to be this symbol of destruction. Like, this is what he was born to do. And so he has this very awe-inspiring description, right? Like, that's the guy that, wow, I think they talk about a lot of times, like with college football, pro football, like who's the first guy off the bus, like to set the tone. Goliath is the first guy off the bus, right? There is no second guy. They give it like 10 minutes before the next guy comes off the bus. But like, he sets the tone for this army, right? And I think he has the effect they're looking for, right? Because what is the response that Israel has from Goliath going out there? And when Goliath speaks, I guess even before we get to Israel's response, what does Goliath say when he goes out there? So we see this description of him. What does he actually go out when he speaks? Yeah. Okay. It's kind of like, hey, let's not bring everybody else into this. Let's just pick one guy. I'm obviously the guy on my team, and we'll settle this mano a mano, right? And how does everybody respond to that in Israel? John?
One of the commentaries I read said that back then it was not too rare a thing that a champion would come forward like Goliath did with that kind of challenge.
Yeah.
They would say, hey, we'll just fight one-on-one, and whoever wins, the other is hurt.
Yeah. Yeah, save the time, save the loss of life and resources, right? Because certainly if you're going to be the side that wins, I'd want more servants than less servants, correct? If you're going to be subject to us, I hope there's more of you than there are less. So like, rather than us kill each other, let's just do 1v1 and get this over with. Yeah, so it's not something that never happened before. We have this unique story in that it's really the only time we see it in scriptures, right? Where it's one man for his army, one man for the other army. Do you know, I did a little bit brief study on this, and I saw some comments about what this one key characteristic of these type of 1v1 situations, what they were supposed to bring out that I thought was unique. That kind of pops up in Goliath's speech and obviously in David's. But when you have the one man versus the one man, it's supposed to be, this will really decide who the gods want to win, right? The gods will decide who wins this. If the gods favor him, he'll win. If the gods favor him, he'll win. All right, so that's another kind of element to this that I found some people kind of mention. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. And I do think some of what obviously David is going into it with that kind of focus that his God is going to determine the outcome of this. But, even in some of what Goliath says, kind of says that as well. But I just thought that was kind of an interesting note that may have tied into some of this as well. So looking at the situation then, when you look at the situation, what is the ironic nature of it when you have this giant from the Philistines come and defy the armies of Israel and demand a challenger, and you're looking at Israel with no challenger? Why is that strange? Jordan?
One of the first features mentioned in Saul is the fact that
Very good. Yeah, so Jordan mentioned it. Saul is not to this degree, right? He's not given this much, but we do know he's a head taller than not just most of the men in Israel. It says every man in Israel he's at least a head taller than. So he looks over everyone. This is what it said in 1 Samuel chapter 8, right? So this is the king that they have. And back in 1 Samuel chapter 8, when they decide to reject God as their king and they demand a new king from Samuel, this is what the people said. The people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, "No, there shall be a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us." Does anybody know what the last thing says? And fight our battles, right? And we talked about how, you remember when Samuel says all these things, they demand all these things from Samuel and what they want out of their king. And then Samuel gives back that list of, this is what the king is going to do for you, or this is what he's going to take from you. So all these things you think he's going to protect and provide and give to you. And instead, Samuel comes back with this list of warnings from God of like, hey, make sure they're aware of this. And it's all these things that the king is going to take from them, right? But one thing it doesn't mention in there is, he doesn't straight up just contradict everything that the people said they wanted. But now we look at Saul, and the very first thing they said they really wanted was a king to be like all the other nations who would go out and fight their battles for them. And Samuel said, well, all these other things are actually going to happen. But now, the main reason you wanted that king, he's not even going to do that. The main thing you wanted from your king was to go out and fight for you, to stand before your enemies, to stand in front of you, to lead you, and Saul won't do it, right? He's not even going to fulfill that part of the job, right? And we've seen kind of how quickly, it didn't take very long for Saul to truly crumble into this quite pitiful excuse for a king, right? We've seen him react out of fear in almost every situation. And I mentioned this a little bit last class. When Samuel doesn't show up exactly when Saul expects him to, based on when him and Samuel talked, he panics and he offers sacrifice even though he's commanded not to. Next time, does the same kind of thing. Sees the people are starting to flee, gets worried, and once again, people are complaining like, hey, we should keep the spoils, do all this. Panics again, is worried about how the people will respond. Okay, we'll save some of the stuff. Ignores the commands of God, right? And we talked about last class how maybe it's easy for us to look at this and be like, man, it seems like God went pretty harsh on Saul to abandon him and send him a tormenting spirit. But we talked about how Saul is showing God and has revealed to God, and why God leaves Saul is because he has shown, I will not obey what you have to say. Whatever his reason is going to be, Saul has proven over and over again, I'm not going to obey the voice of the Lord. Whether it's for fear of the people, whether it's for fear of, my loss of power, fear of my own safety, whatever it is. Saul has proven to God, when things get tough, Saul doesn't turn to God, he turns to himself. He turns to whatever his own intuition tells him he should do, right? And he's proven that to God through like extreme circumstances, where serious circumstances. It's not like these were just unimportant situations, but he has shown God, when things get difficult and you've given me commands to follow, I won't follow them. When there's any sort of testing, I abandon you. And so here we are. He's got another layer of testing. But now it's according to the standard that the people have set. Hey, you go out and fight our battles for us. Well, if he's not going to follow after God's command, we can pretty much expect he's not going to follow after anybody else's. So he's fully, fine giving over all those original roles he was told to adhere to by the people, and certainly the important ones given to him by God. And he's basically a king in name only. He's got the title, but every other characteristic of kingly nature he does not hold in any of his conduct. So that's the initial introduction to the scene, right? But it's not just Saul. Saul sets the tone, and the rest of the people follow, right? He is the face of the people, and the people follow their king. And here in this situation, Saul's afraid, trembles, and so are all the people. And so nobody accepts the challenge given out by Goliath. So how does David come into this? How does David become a part of this story? Yeah, Megan? Okay, so the dad, Jesse, sends David out to provide some wheat for his brothers, some food and provisions, and give some food to the commander of their company or their 1,000. And, hey, how are the guys doing? How are the brothers doing? We talked about this a little bit last class. Does anybody feel like this is similar to a older Old Testament story? Yeah, kind of seems a little bit like Joseph, right? Where the dad's at home, he sends out the youngest or one of the youngest to go and check on the brothers in the field here, check on the brothers at war and see how they're doing. All right, so let's focus though when David actually gets there. So David gets there, he converses with his brothers briefly. Then what happens? What does David hear? Yeah, here's Goliath. What is Goliath doing at this point? When he's not just coming out there and now saying, hey, still ready to accept this challenge or whatever. Like, what's some of the language it says he's saying to everyone, like down in verse 10? So he still mentions the challenge, but what's some of the language he uses? In verse 10 is part of it, and then let me see here. It's later on. I've lost it. I guess verse 23 is when David is involved. But he offers the challenge, but what does it say he's doing to the armies of Israel? Defying them, right? So he's defying the armies of Israel, and David's going to use a different term than the armies of Israel later on, but he's mocking, right? He's insulting, he's tearing them down, he's degrading them. When you do that to someone, what does that show? Like, what does that reveal about you and your relationship to them? If I defy someone, Gary, I'm just going to use you as an example here, right? If or even you to me, if we're just insulting each other, what does that say? What does that reveal about Gary and I? Yeah, I have no respect for you, right? Yeah, there's contempt, there's anger, there's hatred, whatever, but like at some point, there's this belief like if I had respect for Gary or Gary had respect for me, we can't just keep going on treating each other like this, right? Like it's too painful, like we've all had moments where we say things out of anger and that deep amount of remorse and guilt, and you go to that person and you apologize because, I do love you, I do respect you. And it's like that I said something rash in anger. When we have no respect for each other, I don't have to go to Gary and apologize because I feel nothing towards him, right? If Gary hates me to my bones and he has no respect, he's not going to come apologize and be like, my bad, buddy. Like, right? Like, we're not going to do that. That's not how we're going to treat each other if we have no respect. That's how Goliath views not just one man, the entire nation of Israel, right? To just go out there day after day, and he's doing this for 40 days. What have you even, can anybody tell me, like, besides like the common requirements of survival, what things do we ever do 40 days in a row, right? I've had moments of unnecessary, like, confidence where I say something, and usually to someone bigger than me, and when I was a kid, and like, I could do it one time, right? You don't do it twice, and if you do it a third time, I'm probably not here right now with you guys, right? But like we've all, if you grew up a competitive person like I did, like you have moments of confidence, but like, man, 40 days in a row, like I don't think anybody has that kind of confidence, except for Goliath. Not only his brash arrogance for himself, but also this disdain and this utter disrespect for the entire nation of Israel. Now, for everyone in that army, it's just about self-preservation, right? It's just about Goliath hates and disdains us. Now, David gets there. Why is David's presence different? Why is his response different than everyone else's? What makes him and his response to the defilements that Goliath is spewing out, what makes him different in his response than everyone else? How does he, I shouldn't even say his response, because we'll get to that. What does David say or focus on that Goliath is saying? What's different? Go ahead, Jess. Right, he's not focusing inward. Who does he feel is being disrespected? Megan? Excellent. Very good, very good. So Megan hit on it. Verse 26, and what David said to the men who stood by him, what shall be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? It's kind of like those chapters in the Bible, you know, where after you're done reading it, like you'll talk about it and you'll be like, you know, God's not very much mentioned in that chapter. And we've done some in this class where we see horrible things that Israel has done where God is noticeably absent from their thinking or from their thought process or decision making. And here, to start, we've seen no mention of God's presence until David comes, right? Until David comes in to remind, hey, he's not concerned with the army itself. It's the fact that this army represents Yahweh. This army represents God. This nation is meant to represent God. And so David takes that statement personally. And David's going to do something about it. The reason nobody else does is because everyone else in that army is like, you know, he's disrespecting me and disrespecting my king. We see how much clear respect that all of Israel is showing towards Saul because nobody stands up for him. And Saul, obviously, his must be limited respect for all of his people because he won't stand up and fight for them, right? So nobody respects each other on the side of Israel. David, though, comes in, and we can rest assured that David respects God and is going to do something about it. Josie? Yeah, so let's get to that. So David's response obviously comes first and foremost because of his respect for God. Now, what happens after that, where he gets his confidence from, David clearly lines out. Go ahead, Jordan, and make your comment, please.
Yeah, this was just kind of providing, I think, some context why Saul and the army are in the situation they're in. When the people demanded a king, they were demanding a king like the other nations. Kings and people who were not relying on God, didn't have trust and faith in God. Their idea was that if they built themselves up and were strong with their king, then they would be safe. And now we've got somebody who's bigger, stronger, and we see how weak that kingdom is. They were built on a foundation that was not strong. And that's a contrast we're getting here, is the faith in men versus the faith in God. And it's going to be a much stronger foundation in David's eventual age.
That's very good. I'm going to put a pin in a little bit of that because I want to use that in just a second when we get to David's like statements to Goliath and things like that. So David goes to Saul. He's hearing this, and he's like, hey, I'm going to do it. Like, I like how David goes up there, and he's basically like, yeah, I got this, right? So, but before he even gets to that, I do want to make this one quick point, and I without spending too much time, because I briefly alluded to this last class. David, which is why I made the connection to Joseph, David has a brief interaction with his brothers, right? That is recorded here, where we met Eliab, the last chapter. Samuel saw him, and Samuel thought, surely this is the Lord's anointed. This is the one God's choosing. You know, God tells Samuel, hey, man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. And I think a lot of that shows out in this chapter where we see how Eliab responds to David. David comes in there and he's talking from group to group. He's asking multiple people, like, what's this guy been saying? What are we going to do about this? Who's going to stand up on behalf of God? All that stuff. And it says Eliab the eldest heard him when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, why have you come down, and with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. Okay. I always find this section significant because what you have in this chapter, right? You have one truly righteous person standing out amongst a group of people who are unwilling to stand up for what is right and do what is right and stand up on behalf of God. I love this section because this I think shows out so true nowadays, where there are going to be times where you are trying to do the right thing. I don't even want to say trying. You are doing the right things. You are doing good things. And because you are doing good, people will hate you that you're doing that. Even if you have something with a sincere, earnest motivation, people will hate you even more for that. And it's just like Cain and Abel. Why did Cain murder his brother? Because his deeds were evil and his brothers were righteous. Because he did evil things and he had evil in his heart, and Abel was righteous and good, he hated him for that. And I get we're still trying to have an influence in the world. I'm not saying like everybody out there that's not following after God has just evil feelings all the time. I'm not saying that. But you have to be ready for when you try and do sincere, honest, good things, people that are doing evil things over and over again, they're going to hate you for doing good things. They're going to hate you for being good and for being merciful and kind and generous, because inside, I don't know if they're lying to themselves, or I think even when some of us stumble and fall, we have moments like this, so I think we can all relate, where all I can do is just judge the inside of your heart and think, you must have some evil motive here, because everything I do is also selfish and for my own desire. So if you are being kind to me, you must have ulterior motives. You must be trying to get a dig at me. You must be asking how I'm doing because you really want me to dwell on all the terrible things that have happened and make me feel bad about myself. And now we just get in this toilet bowl of nonsense. But like, while it's a simple interaction here, why does Eliab say that? Why does he come out and say, I know the feelings in your heart. I know why you're doing this. It's because you're evil. It's because you want to see the battle. And David's response is, a lot of times how we have to be. You know, all I said was but a word. And sometimes you have to turn and go elsewhere. You can't sit there all the time and prove to everyone what your real intentions are. You can't always do that. And so David, he doesn't sit there and get in an argument. He turns and rather than stop talking because his eldest brother told him to, it says he goes on asking the same question. Even though you had that one person you looked up to your whole life, person you played with, person that probably helped raise you, says you're evil and you have evil intentions. Not going to deter David here. Heather and then Megan.
So I can identify with a life a little bit. I'm an older child. I have an older brother who's like a lot. And there's been times that he's done stuff and I've just rolled my eyes and been like, you know, and even though, like, mentally I know he's a 35-year-old man who's a husband and a father, sometimes I look at him and I still see like an overdramatic figure. And I have to remind myself,
Sorry.
like, just because
Yeah, I feel like every sibling has been the sibling who, my parents would always say this thing of like, you could have just done it the first time before you complained and you would have gotten credit for doing the task. Instead, you complained and now you're going to do it anyway, but you won't get credit for it. Right, Dad? But I've definitely got that comment before but like everybody's also had that sibling interaction where one sibling's like, whatever, and then the sibling right next to them is like, sure, Mom, I got it, no problem, absolutely. And you're just like, oh, that's the worst. Nobody likes their sibling in that moment. Nobody's just like, yeah, good job, brother, that's how I should. But it is that, I think that inward shame sometimes. I think it's inward shame of I've been sitting here for 40 days, listen to this, I haven't done anything. And yeah, little bro's coming up here, not only just the little brother I just saw get anointed, whenever that was, who got anointed after Samuel saw all of us pass in front of him. Even after Samuel said to him and to his father, surely, this looks like the kid, but no, it's not. And so now we get to this point here, and yeah, he's feeling some certain way towards his younger brother here. But yeah, I've been Eliab a lot more than I've been David, I think. Although I am the youngest, so maybe I am David. Maybe I am the one standing out from all the others. Whatever. We'll talk about that later.
No matter how much younger anyone is from you, not to underestimate their abilities and what they can do. 'Cause sometimes they're better than you, and that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Megan?
I think that this is going to just show David's longing. I'm just going to keep doing what's right. I'm just going to keep being a light to the world. People are going to hate me for that. They're going to project their evilness to me. But I know I'll walk in the light. And sometimes it takes just 10 years before someone realizes, oh yeah, you're a good sister. Oh yeah, you might be too cheerful in the morning, but you are a good sister. Whatever it takes. But I can't tell you how many times the happier I got, my sisters were like, you're not the same person. Because they're not Christians. So the happier I got in life, the more they rebuked that. And now they're slowly starting to talk to me more and more. And maybe that light will turn then. Because nothing else has. Or at work, you think I would work with a bunch of Christian people because I was in a Catholic hospital, but no, that's not the case. And I can't tell you how many years it's been, and people are like, why are you always happy? Well, I don't have anything not to be happy about.
Yeah, I think it's two-sided, right? We're not projecting this idea when people come in here like everything's perfect, everything's great, right? Like we know that like some people feel like it's always this big advertisement and everybody's had the best day of their life and we're all like at 100% execution and success rate, right? No, like we gain this trust, we gain this community partially because we share in the failures and the weak moments, but then also like, nobody's staying here because we're all sitting here whining to each other about how difficult life is and how, man, I'm just like sinning left and right. Like, but let's at least, party over that because at least we're doing it together. It's like, no, like we shouldn't be, Debbie Downers. We should have both. We should, hey, we're here, we rejoice with each other when it's time to rejoice. We weep with those who are weeping, right? We should have both. And we should be, of anyone in the world, we should be more joyous and more hopeful than anyone else because we've got the joy and hope that everybody else is looking for. But yeah, it's certainly going to have times where people, they don't know that, and so they don't understand when somebody has it, right? But that's with anything, not even just this spiritual, joy that we felt, this eternal reward that we're working towards. But that's just with anything. When people are doing stuff and it's just like, you mean you can look up the score to the game on your phone? Like, what is that? Like, at one point, people were doing that. Remember, the first time I ever did that was like on my dad's BlackBerry. I was like, this is insane. I can check this and figure out the score in 15 minutes. Now it better be 45 seconds or somebody's getting in like a new phone, right? Because it's flying across the room. But like, who would have thought it got to that point, right? So we never know how these things are until we start experiencing them. And my gosh, we haven't even gotten to the fight yet, and class is almost over. So like, let's at least get to the to the battle scene here. So I do want to kind of, before we set the stage with this battle scene, Jordan brought up earlier the fact that Israel was trying to build this foundation just like every other nation was building their foundation. And just like if we try and build our lives on the foundations that everyone else in the world is trying to build, you'll find out someone has a bigger house, a better job, a better investment group, or whatever they're doing with their money, their time, their hobbies. They have better tickets at the ball game. Like, if you have this foundation like everyone else, unfortunately, someone's usually higher on the pecking order, right? But Israel wasn't supposed to be like everyone else. They were supposed to have God as their king. They were supposed to have this foundation that was unshakable, that didn't matter that, hey, we don't talk about it a lot, but Israel's not the biggest nation in the world. Israel's not the most incredible economic structure we've ever seen. That was Egypt. That was Rome. That was the Macedonian Empire with Alexander the Great. But here's Israel defying Pharaoh by the power of God and all these things. And now we get to a point like this. And Israel's been founded just like everybody else. They've got a king who's frightened and afraid, just like every other king was, of losing their power, losing their kingdom. They've got a nation that's afraid of being subjugated to other nations. And then you have this one man in this story who is standing up on behalf of the God, the king that they were all supposed to be serving. And so you go out and you see this matchup of two men who couldn't be any more different. One, a man of war, experienced, a veteran, a giant. The other, a young man who wouldn't even be in the army yet, so we know he's young, certainly under 20. And they both actually kind of start to say the same things when they go out there, right? Goliath mocks David and mocks the entire army of Israel because this is what you came up with after 40 days. You send this boy, you send a kid to me with sticks. Like, this is all you've got. And he curses David by his gods and says, he's going to feed him to the birds of the air. And then David says almost the exact same thing right back to him. Except, right, instead of talking about the sticks or the armor or whatever that, David mentions, hey, you mentioned how I brought sticks. You just brought a sword and a spear. I, however, brought something different. So, I lost it. I thought I would have it. You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts and the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Right? And then he goes into saying, this day, not only is God delivering you into my hand, he's delivering all of those people behind you that are sitting there waiting for you to fight for them. All of them will be eaten by the birds of the air and of the beasts of the field. Like, he takes it a step further. Every single one of you is going to suffer this fate that you think I'm about to suffer. And it's very funny how, he just says it with greater impact. He makes fun of David for bringing the sling and the sticks, and David makes fun of him for bringing a sword and a javelin, because they're as worthless and as useless as sticks or anything like that in comparison to God, right? And that's what it's all about, is that this whole army that was following Saul was helpless. One man was following God, and this is one of the most popular stories in all of the world. Even people that don't follow after God know this story, and they try and claim it. And it's not about, I've seen some documentaries where they talk about, man, it's quite actually unique when you think about David bringing the sling, and you know how that's like a long-range weapon. Who cares? The sling is unimportant. The fact that he hits him with a stone and the other guy has weapons that require close hand-to-hand combat, those are not important. That's not what the story is about. It's how David outsmarted him with the sling. God could have done it with a rubber band and a piece of chewing gum, right? But David went out there on behalf of God, his king, and he won the victory. And the whole story is meant to be one leader going out on behalf of his nation and the other going out on behalf of their nation. And David goes out on behalf of his king And it's not Saul, it's God. And that's why David is the man that he is, and that's why he's going to be this man that we're following through here. So we'll talk a little bit more about this, but we had to get to that. David fights for God. And when we fight for God, we have the victory, right? When you fight your battles for God, God gets his victory, and we can be a part of that too. Thanks, everybody, for your comments. We will pick up on 304 on Sunday. Thanks, everyone. Point slide pictures. Oh.